Okay, welcome to Cinelit. We are back again. 2021 will not hold us down. We are kicking on. We're making more podcasts, and today we are arguably bringing our biggest ever podcast to your earbuds. We are tackling King Kong and the legacy of King Kong, the sequels, the remakes, the spin-offs. We're going to look at the whole history ahead of King Kong going one-on-one with Japanese monster Godzilla, released later on this year. We covered King Kong fairly in depth in our 5 Reasons to Love RKO podcast earlier on last year. So we're not going to go into too much detail in the original film, but we will touch on it because it looms large in the history of King Kong movies ever since 1933. As ever, my name is Adam Marsh, as usual, Cinelit host. I'm joined by my resident expert, Daryl Buxton. How are you, Daryl?
I'm fine, thanks, Adam. Looking forward to this. Always nice to get a chance to talk about what they call Hollywood's tallest, darkest leading man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that does loom large in all of this. Actually, when you're talking about whenever I refer to anything as like, oh, this movie, the leading man in this movie was the leading man in this movie was King Kong. Practically every single movie, he is the leading man.
The name above the title.
Exactly. Jeff Bridges and all the rest of them have to cope with second billing and all these.
Well, name in the title in most cases.
Exactly. So, So we're gonna look at the history of Kong and spin-offs, etc. As we go through. But one of the reasons, the impetus is for making this podcast, aside from Godzilla versus King Kong, which is coming out later on in the year, is a book that you have edited, Daryl, which is out now and available to buy. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about this new book?
Yeah, it's a book called Giant Monsters of Filmland. It's available through We Belong Dead, the fanzine that has expanded into a giant publishing empire. It's the latest book from We Belong Dead, available via their website. It's reviews of dozens and dozens and dozens of giant monster movies over the decades.
Just what it says on the tin.
Yeah, we've got Kong movies in there. We've got Godzilla and all the great Japanese monsters. We've got monsters from all over the world. We've got monsters from going right back to the 1920s, right up to date, right up to the most recent films. So, and of course, giant monsters are making a big comeback in cinemas at the moment. So, what better time for us to put a book out on them?
Absolutely, and it's a great read, and there's lots of great monster movies that I have never seen before that I'm immensely interested in seeing now after reading this book.
And for those who like to look at the pictures in books, there's loads of great posters and stills and things as well, which is what you want in a monster movie book.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's oversized as well. The book. Cool. So what better time? You know, it's in the air, it's in the zeitgeist. Giant monsters. Let's talk Kong. So
yeah,
we went into great detail on King Kong, a great movie, legendary movie. Arguably in the top 10 movies of that define cinema, I guess. When you look at, if you said what is cinema, and you had to pick out 10 films that would encompass cinema, King Kong's probably going to be in there as a representative of that spectacle, the giant spectacle of cinema.
Well, it's the greatest monster movie ever made, and as such, as you say, it almost demands a place in a great movies of all time list, whereas not many monster movies do, it has to be said.
No, and many of them don't deserve either. so you know, which we will come on to.
We're not dissing them. We don't get us wrong. We love giant monster movies, but King Kong is cinematic art, and that's not something you say about most films about a giant gorilla, is it?
No. I mean, just the fact that people know the shorthand of cinema. People know things about films and cinemas that never have seen the films. They know King Kong climbs the Empire State Building. You know, they know all these cinematic tropes that have been established in a movie that's like, you know, getting on towards nearly 100 years old. You know, it's ridiculous. Yeah. But it was a massive hit, you know, and they capitalized. RKO Studios, who released it, capitalized on that in very quick succession, didn't they? It took 9 months for their sequel to hit cinema screens.
Yeah, appropriately, 9 months later, a son is born.
Exactly,
yes,
literally 9 months.
Yeah. Now, even before Son of Kong, which we'll go on to talk about in a moment, somebody else nipped in and ripped off Kong even before the sequel came out in rapid record time. Because just 3 months after Kong hit cinemas, Walter Lantz, the guy who went on to create Woody Woodpecker, he got a cartoon unit at Universal Studios. And they made a cartoon called King Clunk, which is a Pooch the Pup cartoon. It's on YouTube. Go and watch it. It's great. It's only 7 minutes long, as cartoons tend to be. And it's a black and white comedy remake of King Kong 3 months after the original came out, with Pooch the Pup as Carl Denham. All of the stuff is in there. It's all condensed into cartoon length. And so you get the trip to Skull Island, you get them finding the great ape, bringing it back to America, putting it on show in a big city, Kong falling off a building, the whole lot, plus loads and loads of silly gags in the background. So check out King Clunk on YouTube. So yeah, that even beat RKO to the punch there. And they thought that they were rushing out Son of Kong, but they were beaten to it by Walter Lantz. So but yeah, Son of Kong is extraordinary to bring that out so quickly. And the great thing about Son of Kong, one thing about contemporary monster movies, the ones that we're watching at the moment and the ones we've seen probably since Cloverfield, I would say, there's been this trend in modern monster movies for the filmmakers who've grown up watching Ray Harryhausen and grown up watching King Kong and grown up watching a lot of the films we're going to talk about. And they've now decided, yeah, let's put a modern spin on the monster film. Let's set these films within a sort of recognizably real world, as though you looked out of your window and a monster walked past, and your reaction would be different to the reaction of a character in a 1950s film. Your reaction would be, I can't believe what I'm seeing here, you know. How can this be happening?
That might be your reaction, Daryl. My reaction
Tell us yours,
would be to scream like Ann Darrow. You know, that's perfect 1930s, 40s reaction to.
You'd go to the 30s, 40s, and 50s thing.
I'd hit that high C.
Yeah, but as I say, Cloverfield didn't do that, and monster films, including the recent Godzilla and recent Kong movies, have not done that. They've sort of tried to set the films in a recognizable real world, and they've used like political and military responses to the beasts, and the films have sort of focused on not so much on the sort of monster attacks, but more on the human response to that. Now, interestingly, Son of Kong does that. The sequel to King Kong begins almost as a meta movie before meta movies existed, because the sort of spark of the storyline of Son of Kong is Carl Denham, completely ruined by the events of the first movie, and then getting lawsuits from the New York Metropolitan Authority saying, look, you're the guy who brought this giant monkey over here. He's destroyed half the city. What are you going to do about it? And are you going to pay for it?
Nothing more American.
Yeah. So people had paid their sort of, their dollar or whatever to go and see the sequel to King Kong, thinking they're going to get dinosaur fights and another giant gorilla and so on. And the first 10 or 15 minutes of the movie are about a guy being sued by the New York City.
Well, again, nothing more American than
exactly.
litigation.
Yeah.
It's a perfect analogy of America there. I thought it was interesting that we start off with King Kong, and the way that Hollywood has tended to go is making him smaller. That's like the downward trend almost for the movies that come after the King Kong, particularly in the next 15, 20 years sort of thing. They start off much like Son of Kong is obviously an adolescent, a child Kong.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting angle. I guess when you start off as giant as King Kong, the only way is down, literally, as he fell off the Empire State Building. So Son of Kong is an interesting movie. I thought it was okay. It kind of it kind of
for a quickie sequel, it's great.
I mean, what it could have done
does its job.
Yeah, it could have done with having another couple of years on it, really, to develop it. I mean, it was literally released in the same calendar year as King Kong.
Yeah,
which is ridiculous.
Kong came out in March. The cartoon that I mentioned was out in June, and Son of Kong came out 3 days before Christmas.
There you go. So it's like you're not even clicked over to the next calendar year, and you've already got a movie. So
incredible.
And maybe that says something about RKO wanting to cash in super quick, or maybe it's more RKO didn't have the money to finance a bigger budget follow up. Maybe
possible.
Yeah.
And maybe they thought if they'd waited 2 or 3 years, people might have forgotten what Kong was or not been interested in a sequel. Things were moving pretty quickly in the 30s.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at other franchises in the 30s, things like the Busby Berkeley musicals and things like that, they were banging out one a year, you know, and doing lots of little spin-offs and things. And this seemed to sort of want to sort of work on the marketplace in that same sort of way and get it out quickly. But yeah, for what it is, it's great. It's a lovely little film. It's only an hour long. It's got, once you've got past all the sort of litigation and characters being sued and stuff, which is interesting in its own right, because it's A, it's completely unexpected, and B, it's utterly realistic. It's what would happen.
Yeah.
But once you passed all that, we get back onto the island and we've got a little baby Kong fighting monsters. We've got another great heroine as well in Helen Mack. And it's just a lot of fun.
I think for me, we liked that sense of grandeur that Kong had. It didn't quite manage to capture that again in the way it staged its set pieces.
Yeah, I'm not sure they tried to though. Possibly it was banged out as a quickie, and they were having a lot of fun with it. You know, Ruth Rose, the screenwriter, said about that. She made a remark to the effect of, "We've got to get this out so quickly that I might as well make it comic. You know, we might as well go for the laughs with it." So the 30s posters advertised it with a really weird phrase as well. It was called Son of Kong, a serio comic fantasy.
Ooh.
Fantasy spelt with a PH as well. So serio comic. If you remember when Arachnophobia came out in the 90s, and they came up with this word thrill-omedy to describe it, and serio comic fantasy almost seems to be like the 1930s version of that. It's like, how do we sell this? We need to create some new term to sort of describe it, you know. But a very, very odd film, but very, very sort of enjoyable and fun one.
Well, the cashing in didn't seem to. It might have cashed in, but it didn't seem to spawn a string of Kong movies, a la Frankenstein or Dracula that the Universal Studios were pumping out in the 30s. No.
Probably in the nature of the beast, I suppose, in the nature of what it was, because you know, not every studio had Willis O'Brien working there, making these intricate little stop motion models and spending ages and ages doing all of the animation and the mats and everything. So it's perhaps no surprise that there weren't a string of rip-offs. What you did get was the occasional sort of man in a suit guerrilla movie, which was the nearest you got to sort of imitating, or dare we say aping King Kong. We get that one in early. Yeah,
absolutely.
So perhaps no surprise that we weren't actually getting proper copies of Kong. Every studio didn't have its own Kong because every studio didn't have its own Willis O'Brien.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Willis O'Brien, let's move on to the next one, because we get Mighty Joe Young in 1949. I think that's the next significant Kong-esque movie.
Yeah.
It's not a Kong film. It's a brand new character. who is a giant ape, and it follows a very, very similar plot line to King Kong, and it has
a big stretch for Willis there.
Yeah,
you know,
no, it was fairly
yeah.
plot wise. It's fairly like, well, this is literally King Kong again. Well, that's fine. I mean, you're talking like 16, 17 years later, so you got a new generation potentially watching these movies. So that doesn't bother me too much about it. You've got Willis O'Brien credited as technical creator, but then you have also the first appearance of a lead technician here called Ray Harryhausen, and making his monster movie.
Yeah.
So, and I'm assuming that he did all the work, and Willis was the sort of like the name on the brand sort of thing at that time.
I think so. I think Ray did do a lot of the character work on it. Yeah, and Willis was more of a sort of overseer, I gather, but would have done a bit of hands-on stuff, I'm sure. And as technicians like to do, they like to sort of get involved and get their hands dirty a bit. So, and yeah, I think it's got the mark of O'Brien on it, very definitely. So if it was Harryhausen and other people doing a lot of the actual sort of physical work, I think O'Brien was there sort of leading the way in terms of what he wanted the character to be. And of course, what you've got in Mighty Joe Young is it's almost parallel to the Kong story, except Mighty Joe is portrayed as a nice guy. He's not a sort of marauding killer as Kong is. Misunderstood though Kong may have been at times. He's been dragged out of his own world and dumped into the middle of New York. So how are you going to react? But Mighty Joe Young seems much calmer and much nicer, much friendlier towards humans, and in the film's most famous scene, even rescues kids from a burning orphanage.
Perfect.
It doesn't get much nicer,
Yeah, no, I mean, how can you redeem yourself as a giant ape? Rescue a bunch of kids from a burning orphanage. Perfect.
Yeah,
I mean, I really enjoyed this. I mean,
I like it a lot.
Yeah, I've not seen it before, and I watched it, and you'd hear that it's just a retread of King Kong. The effects are great, but it's just a retread, blah blah blah, and it is, but it's thoroughly enjoyable, and it's very well made, and the animation is relative. I know it's 16 years later, but there's some really innovative leaps and bounds made in this movie. I think in the way that they pull off some of the effects. I mean, the bits with it's a trick so good they did it twice, didn't they? Where they have the lasso, they use the cowboys lassoing lassoing Mighty Joe, which Harryhausen reuses in the Valley of Guanji a few years later,
which itself was an O'Brien project from dating right back to that time,
right?
Dating back to the 30s and 40s. So Guanji took like 30 years to get made, and. So, yeah, it may well be that O'Brien had got that idea written down for his version of Guanji that was going to be made in the early 40s. And then they used that in Mighty Joe Young and then used it again in Guanji when it eventually came out. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think you were talking about how Son of Kong maybe isn't quite the sequel that we wanted to King Kong, entertaining though it is in its own right. We're lucky to have Mighty Joe Young because that almost plays as being the film that we would like a follow-up to King Kong to be,
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is Son of Kong, isn't it? In all but name, he plays a smaller version of King Kong. He's nice. No, retread of the storyline, blah blah blah. But
but it's got the thing. It's got that Son of Kong maybe hasn't so much. Is it's got the spectacle of King Kong.
Yes, definitely. And then it's got some nice, interesting angles to it. I mean, the nightclub scene with live lions is a great idea. It's like one of those things where it's just you think, are you sure that's a good idea, having wild lions in your nightclub?
What can possibly go wrong?
It does feel a little bit like wink to the camera, what's going to happen later? But a thoroughly enjoyable movie.
Yeah, and of course it's itself remade in the 90s as a CGI fest.
That's right, with Charlize Theron playing
yeah,
second
and
billing to Joe.
Not a bad film in its own right, I would say.
No, I'd agree. Okay, let's move on. Let's get another 10, 15-year leap, 12-year leap to 1961, and the British are coming. Daryl, the British get involved in the giant ape movie scene, and we get Conga from 1961.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little about Conga?
Yeah, well, the key thing for Conga with me is that it stars Michael Gough as a mad scientist.
Well,
and Michael Gough as a mad scientist is just heaven to me. You know, I love Michael Gough. He's an actor who gets a lot of criticism from fans of British horror movies. People always claim that he almost unbalances and ruins Hammer's Dracula.
For what reason?
With a sort of a lot of fans think he gives a very over the top, or sort of partly over the top and partly underplayed performance, all in one. You know, he's sort of over the top when he doesn't need to be, and he underplays when he doesn't need to. But I've always found his character in Dracula really, really interesting, because I think he's there almost as the audience representative, you know, and he brings a lot of Michael Gough to that part, as he does to most of his acting jobs through the late 50s and through the 60s and into the 70s. He's one of those actors, a bit like Kenneth Williams, one of those sort of characters where he seems almost to be playing himself on screen, or he's playing this particular persona anyway. If not playing himself, he's playing a particular persona that goes from part to part.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Michael Gough's character, because it's kind of like he plays that British aristocracy kind of character, but with almost like one step to one side, one step to the other. He's either playing a villain or a hero. You know, and it's the same character, practically the same character.
Oh yeah.
But he can easily be just a tilted towards evil or tilted towards good.
Yeah, and like Kenneth Williams, he's playing this sort of almost aristocratic sort of character in bottom of the barrel movies, you know.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, let's get back to Conga.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So we get him playing a mad scientist who is involved in some sort of crash in Africa where he disappears. His boat, or his plane. Is it a plane or a boat crashes? I think it's
a plane crash.
He goes missing for months on end in deepest, darkest Africa, and reemerges safe and well. With a young chimpanzee called Conga. Note the young chimpanzee element to Conga as we carry on. So he comes back to England, and obviously his first thoughts are to continue his experiments in creating some sort of plant life.
A growth serum.
Growth serum from plants and animals.
Now, I'm sure listeners are way ahead of us at the moment, but do carry
wonder
on.
How that could have turned out. So, and obviously, he experiments on Conga, but the experiment is quite interesting because this growth serum that he creates doesn't just grow the chimpanzee. It turns the chimpanzee into a gorilla, which I think is the most remarkable thing about the movie.
Yeah. Or you could argue it turns the chimpanzee into a gorilla suit.
A gorilla suit, definitely.
With a zipper up the back.
Yeah. It's quite low end budget wise, and the color separation overlay technique in the 1960s was there front and center. It's an interesting movie in the sense that it doesn't quite. I feel it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. Whether it wants to be a mad scientist movie, whether it wants to be like a teen drama, it suddenly goes into this 20-minute section where, 10, 15-minute section where it's like I Was a Teenage Werewolf or some sort of teen drama of the 1950s, science fiction teen drama. Or is it a Kong movie? Or is it, all these manner of different giant monster movie?
Yeah, again, they've got their eye on every single corner of the marketplace there,
Yeah.
and they're trying to appeal to everyone and get everybody to buy a ticket, And I don't think it quite worked,
No.
but there was another British monster movie made around the same time called Gorgo. In fact, there'd been a couple of giant monsters in British cinema, because there was the giant behemoth, or Behemoth the sea monster, in 1959, Gorgo in 1960. So there you've got sort of two British equivalents to a Godzilla type figure, and so it was almost inevitable, I suppose, that we'd have our own King Kong eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, done in a very, very low rent version, with Michael Gough doing his shtick in the middle of it all. And of course, Kong does get to sort of, I wouldn't necessarily say that Conga climbs Big Ben as such, more than sort of
leans
hangs
on it,
around behind it.
hangs around next to it, leaning on it. That's
Yeah.
Yeah. But equally, from a sort of like British mentality making that movie, what do? You hit those sort of like iconic images of London. If you're going to go for that,
Yeah,
do it. And I guess that is a shot for the trailer straight away. And I bet that image of Conga stood next to Big Ben sold that film in so many territories around the world.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure
that's why it's in there.
Yeah. Now, it's worth jumping ahead a little bit here and giving a brief mention to Queen Kong, I think, from 1976.
I think the most remarkable thing about Queen Kong is it took that till 1976 for someone to use the title Queen Kong, when King Kong came out in 1933.
Yeah, I suppose we were into the whole sort of feminism, burn your bra sort of thing by then,
So you think it's a male chauvinist thing that we never got a Queen Kong?
Maybe.
We had a Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, we did. Having said that, although Queen Kong does sort of aim to be a sort of comedy feminist movie, the male lead of it is my old mate Robin Asquith.
A legendary feminist.
Indeed, yeah. Star of the Confessions films, and not exactly number one on the feminists list of top 10 males, but
well, Queen Kong's got an interesting history around it, because it's like it was made at the same year as the remake of King Kong in 1976, wasn't it? So
which we'll talk about later. And but to get into that, Dino De Laurentiis actually saw this trashy, cheesy little British comedy with terrible special effects as a likely rival to his King Kong remake, and he had it suppressed for 25 years.
Well, that's the power of the title. It's the power of the title, though. It is. You sell the sizzle, not the steak. And it's like,
and Laurentiis knew that better than anyone.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mr. Showman.
But let's jump back to 1962, where King Kong went abroad. He went to Japan, and they've got their own big fella wrecking cities and stuff over there, Godzilla. So the natural thing was to pair them together. King Kong versus Godzilla, 1962. An interesting film in the sense that it kind of has a 40 to 50 minute super quick run through of both their origins to get you up to speed. And then we have the
just in case you don't know who these
just in case
are.
You don't know, you get that first, but obviously with the Japanese characters interacting with Kong on the island rather than the Carl Denham and his crew.
Yeah, to be fair in that respect, Adam, King Kong had come out in 1933, so it's almost 30 years old. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what sort of release that had in Japan. I'm sure it must have come out over there and been successful, but I don't know if Japanese film goers in the early 60s would have necessarily been familiar with it. And even Godzilla there'd been the original Godzilla, Gojira, in 1954, and then a quickie sequel in 55. And then Godzilla hadn't appeared on Japanese screens for 7 years. So maybe they thought, do people know who these characters are?
Possibly. I mean, they've been doing, the Toho Studios have been doing like other giant monster movies like Rodan and Mothra and things like that. So the giant monster thing was still quite well in the air in Japan, and I guess bringing back the King of Monsters, Godzilla, to fight King Kong.
Yeah, and what better opponent than KK?
Exactly. Yeah. So after that, we get the first teasing of an altercation between the two. An hour, Daryl.
Yeah,
King Kong versus Godzilla. We've got to wait an hour until we get a brief skirmish between the two, and then it's another 20 minutes before we finally get to see some ape-on giant lizard action.
Yeah. But when that comes, oh boy!
Oh, it's great. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it is great. I think the one thing that really lets it down is the Kong suit is not very good.
Yeah.
In fact, it's pretty awful.
It's worse than the one in Conga.
It is. It's terrible. It's really bad, and which is really surprising because arguably the Godzilla suit is one of the best Godzilla suits of that period. You know.
Yeah. The Kong one looks like it's been in a skip for 3 months.
Yeah. Well, you know, he did get buried under all that rock and stuff. So,
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. It was. For me, it really lets it down. It ruins some of the enjoyment of the film for me.
Yeah.
However, once they start,
I agree.
Once they start rolling around and fighting and fire breath and all that kind of stuff, you kind of go with it at the end.
Yeah, when they get down and dirty, that suit sort of starts to fit a little bit. You know, it's makes a bit more sense. But I agree entirely with you. And for years and years with that movie, there's been a lot of talk and discussion about the ending. People have got this idea that Kong wins in the version that was released to the West, and that Godzilla wins in the version that played in Asia. And that's not actually true. We won't tell you who wins, but now there are very, very good sort of Kong and Godzilla Blu-ray and DVD box sets around. So if you look into getting one of the Godzilla box sets, you can actually see the Asian and the Western cuts of these films, and you can see for yourself what happens at the end.
I don't think I've seen the American one.
No,
I've only seen the Japanese version.
Yeah, the American or the sort of westernized version used to play a lot on sort of kids' TV as I was growing up, but maybe that sort of fell out of fashion once you got into the 80s. I think, you know, kids had got sort of new things to watch by then. So, but yeah, I sort of grew up watching a lot of the Toho monster movies on TV, and so yeah, I saw that version 2 or 3 times on television. But but as I say, now via the magic of Blu-ray, you can see both versions on the same disc, and you can see exactly what does happen at the end.
Perfect. I won't spoil it, but it wasn't the last interaction that the Toho Studios had with King Kong. They came back in 1967 with King Kong Escapes.
Yes, yeah. With not only King Kong appearing in that movie, but a strangely named, or weirdly for British audiences, weirdly named human character.
Yeah, the villain of the piece was a grey-haired scientist, genius scientist called Doctor Who, which causes a little bit of confusion for about 5 minutes. Like, what? But no, it's he is cut from the Blofeld Dr. No kind of mold, isn't he, in this movie?
Yeah.
But he's got his own Kong as well. He's got a mechanized version of Kong, Mecha Kong.
Yeah, Mecha Kong. Yeah.
So we do get giant King Kong fighting Mecha Kong.
And this preempts the Mecha Godzilla that didn't arrive until the 70s.
Yeah. I think the idea of mecha and giant robots was in Japanese culture around that period as well. So what better opponent for King Kong, you know,
than himself in robot form?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not a bad movie, and the suit's a bit better. They've improved the suit a little bit, and the Mecha Kong's great, and you know it's an enjoyable hour and a half or so movie.
It is. It's just a great sort of colourful romp, really, and ideal viewing for all ages, I would say.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think one of the things that actually let's move on to the King Kong 1976 remake.
Yeah,
because that came out in 1976. Big Dino De Laurentiis, massive hit studio, directed by the guy who directed Towering Inferno, John Guillem. Guillem.
Guillermin, or however you pronounce it. Yeah.
So he directed Towering Inferno, and he came back for some more building smashing action with King Kong. It's got a terrible reputation, this movie. I mean, I was born in 76, so I didn't see it on release, but it's got a pretty terrible reputation. And watching it back, I don't really understand why, because it's not a bad film. It captures the spectacle of Kong, you know, the grandeur. Oh my God, look at the size of Kong. He's climbing the Twin Towers at that point. It captures all those things that you want from a Kong movie. It's a little bit long, but apart from that, it's perfect.
But films were, you know, Towering Inferno was. Yeah. So yeah. Films were in 76. So we were just on the cusp of the blockbuster movie coming in. You know, we'd had Jaws, we'd had The Exorcist, we got Star Wars on the way. Kong was sort of in the middle of all that, you know.
Yeah, it does feel like it's part of that heritage of the blockbuster, you know, in the 70s particularly, that this was an event movie.
Yeah. I went to see King Kong with my family when I was a kid. I would have been 13 or 14 when it came out, and I've got two younger brothers, and we were all sort of excited for it. And my mum and dad said, "Oh yeah, we'll take you all to see it when it comes out." And we went on sort of opening week and loved it, and the whole audience seemed to enjoy it. You know, I think the big thing I remember at the time being the major point of criticism was there was a lot of controversy about the fact that Laurentiis had announced that he was going to build this giant actual robot Kong to play the organic ape Kong. And as we now know, if you've read about the history of the film, attempts to sort of build this giant robot didn't really work all that well, and I think there are sort of elements of it remain in the film and are used in the film, but it ended up being Rick Baker in a monkey suit.
Yeah,
and I think, but it was still played up in a lot of the film's publicity about, oh, they built this 60-foot giant robot that's going to play the ape, you know, and then the sort of disappointment that didn't happen. And it was almost sort of perceived as though they've tried to fool us here. They've tried to pretend that they're going to build this giant mechanical construct, and then they put the special effects guy in a suit, and we've been conned. We've been conned. Now, nobody could really see past that, as I remember, and I think that's why the film took a bit of a hit, you know. And but as I say, as an audience member in 76 going to see it, and I'd seen the original Kong on TV by then and really liked that. And it was a film that got a lot of TV playing as well, the 33 Kong. So it was well known to the 70s audience. And so we all knew the story. But yeah, I think the 76 film got a better response from audiences than people remember. I think it was largely the press and the media and the critics who didn't like it. And their take on that seemed to be that they seemed to think they were somehow being hoodwinked by Dino De Laurentiis. Now, as a kid, I loved the movie as a monster film. I thought it was great. Kong only really gets to fight the big snake in the film. There's no fight with the T-Rex or anything, which we sort of knew from the original. But the fight with the snake is great. And seeing the movie years later as an adult, I'd actually fit it in alongside a lot of the stuff that was coming out from the more adult filmmakers of the 70s. It feels a lot to me like a Robert Altman film in places.
It's got something to say in it, hasn't it? It's got something to say.
Oh yeah,
with the sort of like eco message, I guess, with petroleum companies and things like that.
Sure.
It's got
and all that stuff they do with the giant petrol station and the giant gas pumps and everything. With Kong sort of in a cage that's sort of designed to look like this huge petrol station is very, very and product placement everywhere. That's very, very Robert Altman. That's the Altman of Nashville. That was made the year before. And for viewers of 1990s films and fans of the Coen brothers, I also think you've got Jeff Bridges doing a little trial run for Lebowski.
Okay.
You watch the opening scene of King Kong, where Jeff Bridges' character is pretending to be drunk so that he can accidentally, on purpose, get into this secret military compound to find out what's going on. It's Lebowski.
Cool.
yeah. We've also got Jessica Lange is in there playing, making her debut, and again that sort of destroyed her career for about 6 or 7 years until she did Frances in the early 80s. She really wasn't taken seriously at all.
No.
And she managed to sort of haul her career out of the gutter, really. But when her character's discovered in Kong, and she's sort of been involved in this sort of explosion or accident on a boat, and she's survived it, and she's found floating in the sea, and she is brought on board the rescue ship, and she tells a story of how the crew have been watching Deep Throat on board their vessel, and as I say, I was 13 when I saw that film. None of that meant anything to me, but seeing it now, it does. So
yeah,
again, you've got this weird mixture of sort of kiddie monster movie and content that is going to be over the heads of that audience, aimed at the mums and dads sort of thing, but they're not only aimed at the mums and dads who are interested in things like satire and so on. And it's got this really weird sort of tone to it, and I think that really works and really gives it a sort of longevity and an appeal to people watching it today. Yeah, massively underrated, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, it doesn't do anything special. In the sense of like, it doesn't. Oh my God, they've updated Kong for the 70s. It doesn't.
Well, it makes no changes.
No,
really?
It's the same.
Other than this layer of sort of satire and political comment and so on, social comment, but yeah, it's the same story effectively. And you've got things like the World Trade Center replaces the Empire State Building and stuff, but that's all just cosmetic, really. I
mean,
he's still on top of the biggest building in America.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and it's like it's still sort of like even the spectacle of it. The Kong of 33 is still a gigantic spectacle, so it's not like you can like up the spectacle level. It's just a different kind of spectacle where they switch it from stop motion animation to a man in a suit. Well, very good. But it was. I guess it was sort of a hit because it spawned a sequel, albeit 10 years later, with King Kong Lives.
Yeah, and Guillermin directed that as well. He was brought back to make that. Dino De Laurentiis on board again. I just wonder why they took so long.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I really, it was quite a surprise. I remember when it was announced, and it was like everyone was sort of, why are they doing this now?
It's not. They literally pick up straight after the end of King Kong.
Yeah. Even to the extent where the first 5 minutes is footage from the 76 version.
Yeah.
So a little recap of what happened in that movie or at the end of that movie. So it is literally sort of, here's the story so far, and now we're into we're into part 2 sort of.
Now, if King Kong 1976 has a bad reputation, King Kong Lives 1986 has such a bad reputation that it's almost been erased from cinema history.
Yeah.
Yeah, why? I mean, again, I've watched it. It's not a great film, but the amount of vitriol that gets spewed towards this movie is astonishing, really, considering. Because I watched it, and it's like, I remember watching it as a kid. I remember watching it now, and it's like, yeah, it's all right, you know.
I think, again, it got killed by the media and the critics. And as a result of which, I remember it barely playing anywhere, certainly in Britain. It hardly got a release. It didn't open in Derby, for instance. Right. Well, I didn't see it until some time later. I didn't see it in the cinema, and I was seeing everything in the cinema then, you know. And so it didn't open here, as I remember. Not that we got many places for it to open in 1986, to be honest. But and then when it did eventually come out on video and DVD, it was only available in horrible pan and scan versions.
Right.
So it's become quite hard to see in a full CinemaScope version. So, and I think when you do, the visual impact of the movie is really quite striking. I think it's a great visual movie. I think they do a lot of very interesting stuff with the visuals and with sort of outsized sets and again particularly good use of mixing man in a suit type stuff with sort of overhead shots and model shots and things. It all plays very, very convincingly to me. You know, I'm sure people could watch that film and really, really pick holes in the special effects, but if you just watch it once with your brain switched off, sort of thing, it all sort of works. It all seems to flow. It all works together. You never get the feeling that, oh, they've cut from a model shot to a shot of a guy in a monkey suit sitting on a mountain or something. You know, it all seems to flow fairly seamlessly. I think it's got quite a weird tone to it as well, which might be off-putting to some people, because it starts off as this very sort of sentimental idea that Kong is actually alive and they're trying to revive him with a heart transplant and blood transfusions and so on. But then once he comes back to life, it actually gets really, really vicious. There's guys being torn in half, and a scene where his staple diet becomes alligators, and he's sort of ripping those in half and chowing down on them and piling up the bones. So yeah, it does get quite gruesome after this sort of sentimental sort of start, and then it lapses back into the sentiment for the final act. Set against that, you then get, I think that the Kong heads, and I say heads because there are two Kong characters in this, and again we'll leave people to discover, you know, what that's all about, I think. But the heads are very, very expressive, and even to the point where they occasionally have quite sort of goofy smiling expressions on them, which again sort of adds to the tonal weirdness of it, I think. And I think, again, that might have put some critics and some of the early audiences off a bit, thinking, well, we've waited 10 years for this movie, or we haven't waited 10 years for it, maybe, but they've given it to us anyway. And it's now got this really strange tone to it, you know, so we don't quite understand what it's all about.
Yeah, it was tonally weird in the sense of, like, it's got this really sentimental stuff, and it's like a little love story, and it's kind of got a reverse one of Kong falling in love with Jessica Lange in the first remake, and then you got like the female Kong falling in love with the male hunter character.
Interestingly, ripping off the plot of Queen Kong there.
There you go.
Dino.
Maybe Dino knew back in '76 that he was going to have that. I think for me, there's a couple of things that bothered me about this movie, in the sense that potential reasons why it didn't land. I think the special effects, whilst being very competent, they weren't like the special effects that 1986 movies were employing.
No.
And I think that's why it felt like, even though the effects, the model shots and the interlaying the man in suit with the model shots works brilliantly. And if you take yourself out of the time and watch it like now, it's like, oh yeah, it's perfectly well done. You know, it's comparable to Godzilla. It's comparable to a lot of those movies that of its ilk. But if you compare that to the 1986 movies and 85 movies that were being released, Back to the Future with the flames and the lightning bolts and those kind of special effects were what were in vogue, I guess, during that period. And maybe it just stood out as being old-fashioned.
I think so. Which I think it actually the 80s movie, the big hit 80s movie of that whole effects blockbuster period that King Kong Lives really does compare favourably to is Romancing the Stone, I think. It's got that sort of vibe to it.
Yeah. It's not quite as it's nowhere near as good as Romancing.
It's not. I'm not saying it's as good, but it's a decent imitation of that style of cinema.
The sort of adventure romp kind of thing.
Yeah, which itself was harking back to the past, you know.
I think one of the things where it feels a little bit like been there, done that.
Yeah.
You know, you got the military hunting Kong, and then you got the hunters. The sort of like you.
Oh yeah, there's nothing new.
There's not absolutely nothing new, but almost to the point where they've gone out of their way to find the things that have been most used in cinema. And we get the Jaws hunters all going out to hunt Jaws. We get the same thing with Kong. You know, the drinking rednecks, and we get the military leader who just won't listen to reason. You know, you get all those kind of stereotypes bundled into one here, and it just feels a bit like, really, 10 years waiting for that, and here it is.
Yeah. But again, I think watching the film now, you know, we've lived through a cinema age in, say, the past 30 years where paying homage to old movies has become a thing. You know, it's become a bit of a hip trend, you know. And so I think watching King Kong Lives again now, you sort of buy all that. You think, oh yeah, it's nice to see all this stuff clumped together in one movie.
I'm not sure.
And I think it's a film that's aged well.
Yeah, I mean, I watched it again recently. And your first reaction when I said I've watched King Kong Lives, and you went, "Oh, I don't envy you." It was like, and then you went, I best watch it again as well. And obviously, you've really changed your tune.
And I have revised my opinion. And I think, as I say, seeing the film as it was meant to be seen in CinemaScope and being able to appreciate John Scott's absolutely magnificent score as well through a proper sound system is you know, see the film right, and I think it works.
It is one of those movies that probably ruined Linda Hamilton's attempts at being an A-list Hollywood actress in the 80s.
Yeah.
She was hot off Terminator and then this and Black Moon Rising.
She was the Jessica Lange of this movie. Yeah.
She had two films out in 86. She had King Kong Lives and Black Moon Rising, and both of them flopped. And it was just like, that's you done, love. Back to TV.
Yeah. Talking of which, Dino De Laurentiis had another film out in 86, a little thing called Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet, wow. See, very different. If we're going to make a Dino De Laurentiis universe world, you know, for movies, God knows how you fit Blue Velvet into that world.
Yeah, Frank Booth versus Kong.
Yeah, when we throw in Ming the Merciless turns up at the end.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I honestly couldn't call that one either.
So let's move on to the more modern takes on Kong. Peter Jackson, huge budgeted King Kong remake, which is an interesting one. It feels to me that the Peter Jackson King Kong was like his Western. Yeah. Not in sense of film. It's like whenever you ask a film director, they've made a few films. It's, if you can make any film, what would you make? Oh, I'd love to make a Western. I'd love to make a Western. It's like literally every filmmaker wants to make a Western.
Yeah, and so this was his dream project.
I think it was
the thing he'd wanted to do since he was 5.
I think so. Yeah, and it's like, and it plays like that. It's very sort of like reverential to the story of Kong, and I don't know how it's much longer than King Kong 1933, but it tells the same story. You know,
here's one thing, Adam. You were talking about the pacing of Mighty Joe Young earlier on. Now, an interesting fact with Peter Jackson's King Kong is it's over 200 minutes long, so it's over twice the length of the original Kong. And by the time that you have got 100 minutes into the film, so by the time that the original Kong would have played out, Jackson's characters haven't even got onto Skull Island.
See, I detect a problem there. I think that's if, as an audience member, I was like, get to the island, come on.
Well, as you're indicating, as you're suggesting, I don't think this was made for an audience.
Oh, it's made for him.
It was made for an audience of one. I really don't think Peter Jackson cared all that much whether people went to see this. He just wanted to get this out and make it for himself.
Yeah, well, it does play like that. It does play like a hugely expensive vanity project, and it's very good. In the sense of
it's slick. It tells the story. It tells the story,
but it just lacks a bit of something. It lacks a bit of soul, and I think one of the things that really got me, particularly with the 70s and the 80s Kong, that they seem to miss what people want to see from a Kong movie. And that's Kong fighting another giant monster. And it's like we had 76 No Giant Monster. You had a snake. Oh, shut up, a snake. Come on.
Yeah.
King Kong lives. Oh, we've got a female Kong. Great. Are they going to fight? No, they don't fight. So we get to Peter Jackson's, and we get him fighting another giant monster. And it is
he's actually duking it out.
It's the most thrilling bit about it for me.
I agree. There are some interesting characterizations. I think casting Jack Black as Denham is as close to a masterstroke as the film gets. I think he's a really good fit for that part. It doesn't actually quite work as well on screen as it did on paper, I think.
No, well, I think
he's good, but the idea of Jack Black playing Carl Denham is better than the reality.
Well, I think just such a mammoth running time, you end up being overexposed to that character. And I think if it was half the time and Jack Black was on screen half as much as he was, you might have a different opinion on his performance and how that character has an impact.
Yeah. In a 100-minute movie, he'd have worked a lot better. Yeah. Or in a 200-minute movie, Robert Armstrong might have had the same effect in the 33 version.
Yeah.
You might have had enough of him after half an hour,
And I think also it's like I like Adrian Brody, but he's dull as dishwater in this.
Oh yeah.
And he's not a great leading man in the sense of classic Hollywood.
Brody can do that occasionally if he's in a part that he's not really interested in. He phones it in. He underplays. He bobs in front of the camera, and that's what you get.
Yeah, and it's a shame because we got that in this, and it kind of felt like you needed more from the humans in this movie. Kong, so it's over 3-hour running time. Kong can't do all the work, guys. Come on.
Yeah. What do we think about Kong in this movie? I'm not keen, I must say.
Yeah, it's super CGI, isn't it?
Yeah.
You never lose the fact that you're watching a CGI creature rather than a real life physical thing. Which, whilst the suit era of Kong, live or die on how good the suit is, you still get that physical presence.
Yeah,
I don't think you get that even in the 76 one where you get the man in the suit and you get the robot arm kind of thing holding Jessica Lange. You still get that physical feel that there's something there.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't really get it in the Jackson one.
Now, here's the thing, Adam. In the publicity and all over the extras on the DVDs and Blu-rays and so on, they really try and play up the idea with Jackson's Kong that Andy Serkis is doing his whole motion capture thing. He's doing the mocap stuff, which was quite new at that time. It was quite a sort of revolution in cinema. It had been done a little bit before by Robert Zemeckis and people, but it was really being sold to us as, this is a major development in cinema. And the key thing that we're going to tell you about it is because we've got an actor doing this, even though it's CGI, we've got an actor bringing a bit of personality to this. Now, you compare that to the personality that Willis O'Brien puts into Mighty Joe Young and into the original Kong. And I like Andy Serkis, but there's no comparison. There's nowhere near as much heart to this Kong as there was to the original, and there's nowhere near as much as Peter Jackson thinks there is.
No, I think there is for him because he's retelling that story.
He's too close to it though.
Yeah.
It's his baby.
Yeah. I must admit, it's one I have no real interest in watching again.
No.
But I have had interest in watching the 70s version again. You know, obviously King Kong I watch fairly regularly over the years. You know, every couple of years I'll stick King Kong on. You know, 90-minute wonderful joy. You know, this hasn't really landed on that in that stretch. I mean, being over 3 hours immediately makes me question whether I want to watch anything over 3 hours.
I know.
For a second time anyway, you know. So I think we'll give that one a miss. But let's move on to Kong Skull Island. So this is like the second film in a kind of monsterverse. Legendary Studios are trying to do a monsterverse thing. We'd had Godzilla, the new American remake of Godzilla, or reversion of Godzilla. And Kong Skull Island came on a couple of years after that. And it gets it right.
Yeah.
It gets it so right.
Everybody's second favourite Kong movie, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets what people want from Kong. They don't want another version of King Kong. Mm-hmm. We've already had 2 remakes of that, and a partial remake in King Kong versus Godzilla. And nearly every Kong movie retells it in some way. Mighty Joe Young retells it, you know.
Yeah.
So we don't want that anymore as a Kong fan, as a giant monster fan. We want to see Kong beating the crap out of giant monsters.
Kong's a character. We know that he's a character. Let's put him in another story. Let's tell a different story using this familiar giant ape. And it gets it so right. And I think there's a lot in there for a lot of people because it's got a big name cast and it's got a cast that is fairly varied. So there'll be actors that appeal to different areas of the marketplace. I think it's genuinely got a real sort of Apocalypse Now type vibe to it in places.
Very much so.
So I think it'll appeal in that sense to a sort of cineast audience, you know. People that have grown up on the movie brats and so on will sort of get that 70s vibe in this film. And then for the people who love CGI and the people who like seeing monsters scrapping it out, it's got that in spades. So
I say true a revelation for me because I watched Godzilla. I wasn't overly fond of the Godzilla remake. No. It was like they kept doing that sort of like showing him on TV, showing him in the background, not really just give us Godzilla front and center. That's what we want, you know. And they kept teasing. And then when it finally came, I was bloody fed up and wanted to go home. So it didn't really achieve its building the anticipation for me. Whereas Kong just nailed it. We got so much Kong, we got so much fighting, we got character, got a whole great story, got that 70s vibe to it. We got some great human characters,
new monsters as well, which were fantastic. So
exactly, which then builds us up and sets us up to this year's King Kong versus Godzilla. And as we're recording this today, the trailer dropped this week for King Kong versus Godzilla. Have you seen that? No, Godzilla versus King Kong rather.
Yeah, doesn't give it sort of gives too much away, and B, it doesn't give a lot away, I would say.
Well, that's good. I don't want the trailer to tell me everything that's in the film. I don't need to see the film, then, do I?
Yeah.
God, I sound like my mum then, you know.
What we do know from it is there is going to be Godzilla versus Kong scrap action. So
I hated Godzilla King of Monsters. The last Godzilla movie.
I wasn't keen on that at all. No,
I really didn't like it, and a lot of my concerns with that movie was like it was just shot in darkness.
Yeah,
you know, it was everything was really murky, and you barely saw anything. And it's just like we've seen that trick, that coming from the shadows. We do something different now. We know. Come on, and that movie, it literally felt like I had to turn the lights on, turn the contrast, or I can't see what's going on in this movie. And aside from the fact that the convoluted, messy plot that you just all over the shop. So I was naturally, I thought, well, obviously this is building on that. It's going to be a bit of a mess. And the trailer, it raised a lot of that. It's relatively brightly lit, you know. Yeah. It's like they're fighting and you see them fighting in the city and stuff. And I'm watching it, and then there's a little moment halfway through the film where I almost jumped out of my seat, and it's where Kong just lays a punch on Godzilla.
Yeah, fantastic.
And it's just like, it's like Mike Tyson landing a punch in the 80s. It's like, what a punch.
How that's going to play in the film, whether it'll be the opening punch of a fight or what, I don't know, but it plays really, really, really well in the trailer.
It does. It literally made me, I went, yes! Yeah. Jumped out of my seat. It was like, wow, this is great.
And then later in the trailer, we've got Godzilla giving as good as he got as well. So it's boding well, I think.
Yeah, touch wood, touch lots of wood we can find. I think maybe this will be a lot of fun and have what we demand: big monsters fighting each other.
Skull Island showed it can be done. You can recapture
absolutely
that spirit. And the two Godzilla films so far have just missed the mark, I think. So maybe the answer is this team up is the answer.
Fingers crossed. And apparently, there's the glimpses of Mechagodzilla in the trailer as well.
Yes,
So we'll see how that bodes. Hopefully, we'll have some mecha action in there as well.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people are theorizing that Godzilla and Kong might team up to fight a third monster, and that's possible. That's a well-worked formula, so it is possible. I'd like to think that there's going to be a little bit more to it than that. I think there might be a little extra twist in reserve. I do hope so.
What, they team up and then at the last minute Godzilla stabs him in the back?
Who knows? I'll
hits him with a steel chair, wrestling style.
I'm not coming up with any theories. I'm leaving that to the well-paid script writers.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, unless there's any other thing that you want to touch on, Daryl, I think we've had a mad dash through the history of the legacy of Kong.
Yeah, I think that's been an appropriately gigantic session there, Adam. So we love the big guy. That's all I can say.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and it's funny because I have an issue with the Planet of the Apes movies. I don't like watching the Planet of the Apes movies. It makes me feel uncomfortable seeing the apes on screen. I can see evolution in their eyes, Daryl, and I don't like it. Whereas I don't feel that with the Kong movies. It's like I'm comfortable watching the Kong movies. Maybe it's the size; it doesn't make much difference. But
because he's comfortable in what he is, he's not aspiring to be anything else.
No.
Other than a gigantic gorilla that can tread on you, if he feels like it. Whereas, as you say, the apes seem to have a bit of an agenda.
Yeah, I just don't like it now. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I'll tell you, it really does. So when we first started about doing this, I was like, I'm not sure about this, but I've enjoyed my my jaunts down Kong Alley, and hopefully we'll be enjoying Godzilla vs. King Kong later this year.
Let's hope so.
We're hoping to jump back on and delve more into this Giant Monsters of Filmland book and maybe do a couple more podcasts on other areas of monsters. I think maybe do the Japanese kaiju monster series. Maybe we'll need a few podcasts for that one. There's thousands of them. But maybe look at in some of the giant insect movies and things like that of the 50s, and maybe something like that.
Great.
Obviously, we need to tackle Harryhausen at some point
in
great depth.
Yeah. The master.
Absolutely, yeah. So stay tuned for some of those. We will come back to giant monsters relatively soon. Thank you again to Quad and the BFI for supporting this podcast. We will see you again in a few weeks' time. Take care.